and I'm doing my research project on Jaws and the battle between man versus nature. This is a quote from the novel that reads, "Look, Chief, you can't go off half-cocked looking for vengeance against a fish. That shark isn't evil. It's not a murderer. It's just obeying its own instincts. Trying to get retribution against a fish is crazy." To start off, I wanted to provide some background into the novel. So most of you have probably viewed the film adaptation of Jaws sometime in your life, but for my project, I will rather be focusing on the novel Jaws, written by Peter Benchley in 1974. And this date is important to the focus of my project, so make sure to keep this in mind because it will be brought up in the next few slides. So the novel Jaws was inspired by a couple shark attacks that Benchley had read, and mostly by the exploitation of a great white shark by a man named Frank Mundus. The novel is set in a small, largely dependent tourist town called Amity in New England. The story follows a great white shark that preys upon the people and the three white middle-class men, Police Commissioner Martin Brody, Matt Hooper, hired by Brody, and Quint, a shark hunter, all on a quest to stop this rampage. So the theme of Jaws is man versus nature, a familiar trope seen among many novels or films. However, I would like to note that this novel was a cultural phenomenon. It was the inspiration for many famous books or movies we see today. But going back to the man versus nature complex, this novel showcases a triad of what society would deem three masculine men: a chief of the Amity Police Department, an intelligent oceanographer, and a shark hunter. And this battle between the three men and the shark becomes a war concerning the protection of white male superiority. This fight is essentially a test to their masculinity and whether men really are stronger than nature, which this novel does indicate as being true in the end. The big concept is that there is an anxiety about a possible loss in masculine power, and this anxiety would result in a non-functioning society if men did not play by their gender role. Benchley could be enforcing the need for a return to a traditional lifestyle where men are the dominant superiors. To provide some behind the scenes of the making of this novel, at the time this novel was written, a transition took place from a traditional conservative lifestyle to a more modernized sociable society. America in the 1970s can essentially be defined with two words: self-expression. Benchley had written this novel in the middle of an activist takeover. There were public protests, which was a rise in activism starting in the 1960s for social justice, where many social groups were fighting and gaining more freedoms than they previously had, such as Native Americans, Hispanics, the LGBTQ community, and one of the most prominent groups was that of women. There was a women's rights movement that occurred where women had gained newfound freedoms. In the 1970s, women were finally getting accepted into male-dominated businesses and universities. Opportunities and jobs that were once only reserved for men had been broadened to include women. However, this change had brought along controversies. Many people did not favor this modernized society as they feared it would cause social problems and that women would try to overtake men, those of whom were supposed to be the authoritative figure. This rise in equality between men and women had sparked a polarized division among the two genders, and I argue that Benchley was on the side that opposed equality between men and women. This is a quote that I wanted to add that provides an analysis from a gender studies point of view that reads, "Why some men behave the way they do. Men are usually biological males claiming rights and privileges attendant to membership in the dominant gender group. For an individual male to enjoy the benefits that derive from membership in the dominant gender group, he must present himself to others as a particular kind of social being, a man," by Douglas Schrock in Men, Masculinity, and Manhood Acts. So, my method of analysis, I will be conducting close readings of passages in the novel and will analyze those passages through a gender and historical perspective, as well as utilizing arguments from other scholars. One key passage of the novel that really highlights my argument comes from page 260, right after Hooper's death, where a defeated Brody tells Quint, "All we can do is wait until God or nature or whatever the hell is doing this to us decides we've had enough. It's out of man's hands." But Quint tells him that he is going to kill the shark, replying, "We have no choice." This whole scene shows two different people, Brody, who is insecure in himself to face this external force, and Quint, the more confident masculine man who views this shark as a challenge. The significance of this scene is that in the novel, Brody's wife, Ellen, is having an affair. Brody cannot defeat the shark due to his insecurity from this loss in masculinity, compared to Quint, who wants to face the shark. Brody faces these internal and external forces, all issues that derive from his loss of masculinity. Benchley's novel, I feel, is basically saying that these events would not happen if Brody was acting like how men should traditionally act in society, with a sense of superiority. It's like a cause and effect. My argument is that, or my overall purpose for this project is to explore how the great white shark in Benchley's novel Jaws symbolizes a threatening force against male superiority. I argue that this fight between man and animal in the novel is a war over gender, and that this close war had altered people's perception of great white sharks. This shark had become a threat to the male character's masculinity, and I feel that this is the reason why it made people fear this particular species, as it was always believed that in nature men are the most superior beings, but in most of this novel, this view was largely questioned. This becomes the grounds for my humanistic research question: what are the consequences if one is thought to be stronger than man? Will patriarchy always prevail, and at what cost? So, some arguments from other scholars include Gregory Phipps, who argues in his article Naturalism and Intersectionality in Peter Benchley's Jaws, that the novel focuses on portraying animal symbolism among race, gender, class, and sexuality. For example, Phipps argues that on page 271, when Quint yells to Brody, "I see your cock, you bastard," this had turned the quest to catch the shark into a struggle for supremacy, given this language of sexual competition. Another quote that Phipps discusses is when Brody is left somewhat defeated and tells Quint, "It's out of man's hands," but Quint doesn't accept this and says he's going to kill the shark, adding, "We have no choice." Quint does not accept that there is something a man cannot do. Beryl Francis, in her article Before and After Jaws, Changing Representations of Shark Attacks, talks about how before the novel Jaws was released, people did not fear great white sharks, or any species of sharks for that matter. It was only until the release that people began to get testosterone rushes, or a heightened want to act out manly qualities. And media forms like newspapers or magazines dramatize sharks as monsters that viciously kill people. The third scholar is Peter Biskind, where he similarly talks about gender and mentions naturalism, specifically when he centers his argument around how the shark unmans him or uncovers his remaining masculine qualities or insecurities. Why you should care. The shark species post-Jaws were represented in a negative way after the novel had shown a battle that almost defeated man. Media publications after the release had begun and still do portray sharks in a cynical way. This shows the consequences that can occur when male superiority is questioned, false representations to make something look bad in order to uplift white men. Thank you.